She smiles just like a river, floating softly to the sea. And she floats, floats, floats away my problems. Helps to take a little weight off me. If she's happy, oh, you know I'm in heaven. And if she's sad, well, she ain't gonna say. 'Cause she knows I'm only treading water. Guess she thinks I'm better off that way. Overcomes me, I'm blinded by the night. Well, she takes my hand and leads me to the light, and whispers at the morning, such a sight to see. Well, she keeps me looking forward to a new day. So I'm happy just to be her lover. Oh, and I hope that she understands. If I hurt her or make her crazy, well, I'm just an ordinary man. Well, she smiles just like a river, flowing softly to the sea. And she floats, floats, floats away my problems. It helps to take a little weight off me. Yeah. Helps to take a little weight off me. Helps to take a little weight off.
Well, a good Thursday morning to you, and welcome to Real Talk at 8:30 Mountain Time, 10:30 Eastern. I'm Ryan Jesperson, your host. We have a great show in store for you today. We're going to be jumping right in where we left off yesterday. Of course, all eyes were on the inauguration of the 46th President of the United States of America, Joseph Biden, and, of course, the newly minted Vice President, Kamala Harris. We're going to be taking a look today, as promised, at what this means for Canada's international trade relationship with the U.S. Mark Warner will join us in about 20 minutes' time. I'm not sure if Mark's going to be chiming in from New York or Toronto. He works out of both major centers as an international trade and investment lawyer. Mark's going to give us a pretty clear sense of how the game might change when it comes to doing business with our neighbors to the south. Is it an improvement? Is it going to be made more difficult? Now, specifically on the pipeline file, some difficult news yesterday for Alberta, for Canada, for the economies of those two jurisdictions. And as Premier Jason Kenney is arguing, the professional relationship, the business relationship, the neighborly relationship between Canada and the U.S. We're going to dive into that issue head first. After the 9 o'clock news today, we're going to talk to the leader of the Maverick Party of Canada. They're fighting, they say, for Westerners on the federal political landscape. Jay Hill, a longtime conservative government whip. We're going to talk a little bit about Jay's political career and what brought him to this point. But if you have a question for a party, is it a separatist party or not? Does it have the Conservative Party of Canada in its crosshairs or not? Will it field candidates across the country? I mean, obviously not. Or not. We'll get into those questions just after 9 o'clock. We'll be keeping an eye on our hashtag RealTalkRJ for your questions. You can also ask them, of course, in our live YouTube comments thread. And then we're going to talk about homelessness today. We hope in meaningful fashion with back-to-back Real Talk roundtables. 6 guests, some of them with lived experience, many of them with executive experience on the front lines, working with social agencies. They're going to come in. We're going to have, we hope, a conversation that makes some progress in trying to address this in meaningful fashion. You know, these conversations each and every day are presented by our sponsors, including Bitcoin Well, our title sponsor. 2021 is going to be a big year for Bitcoin Well. They've expanded their staff. They've grown rapidly. They're employing 40 people in Alberta's capital region. They're changing their digs, and of course, they're going public. This is all huge as we watch cryptocurrency, specific Bitcoin, continue to surge. If you have questions on what that means, you want to make sense of it, you hear people talking about it, but you don't get it, and you want to have confidence. In other words, you don't want to participate in shady dealings. You want to know you can trust the buy and sell purchase of Bitcoin. Check out Bitcoin Well under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
This is Real Talk. Here is my dad, Ryan Jesperson.
That is the apple of my eye and the love of my life, my son Wyatt, and we appreciate him doing that for us. Yesterday was a big day for young and old, so whether you're American or not, paying attention to a transfer of power. Some are calling it the return of stability, the return of decency to the White House. President Joe Biden had this to say yesterday as part of a moving and impactful inauguration address.
Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once-in-a-century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself. A cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this. Bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause.
So that's Joe Biden yesterday as part of an inauguration address that I know many of you, skipped Real Talk for. You're telling us on the live chat right now. You're saying we missed you live yesterday for the inauguration. We're all back here together now in unity. And that's what matters. I'm not going to steal from Biden. I'm not going to steal from the speech. But here we are all back together now. And we know that you're going to check out the podcast. We know you're going to watch the YouTube version of yesterday's show. You're not going to want to miss it, by the way. Some transplant stories that'll just grab your heart and just hold it there and probably prompt you to sign your donor card too. But that was the point yesterday, as we heard from poets and performers and prognosticators too, and of course the president, Joe Biden. Talk of unity, talk about recovering America's role on key fronts like global health and security and the global fight for our climate and for the future of our planet. Now, some of you are rolling your eyes for sure. Joe Biden's not for everybody. Some of you still believe the election was stolen, and nobody's going to change your mind, and that's fine. And you can rattle your sabers all you like, but the fact is the world is moving on. And this government in the United States is moving on with its mandate, with campaign promises to fulfill, some of them, I'm sure, and with a keen eye on what they believe is best for America. Now, that needs to include Canada. America is our most important trading partner. And one of our key exports to the United States is Alberta energy, right? Alberta crude. The oil and gas industry, I think, has been on pins and needles, to say the least, after being battered, after being hammered for the last number of years. And we feel that pain collectively. For some of you, it's your household. For some of you, it's you. Some of you, this isn't lost on you because you're watching Real Talk live on YouTube when you'd rather be on a pipeline. You'd rather be on a drilling rig. You'd rather be running your hotshot business. You'd rather be working any of the thousands of jobs that spin off as a result of, or as an indicator of, a healthy oil and gas industry in the province of Alberta and Saskatchewan and other Canadian provinces. You get it. We don't have to tell you that times have been tough. Your lines of credit are maxed out. You've second mortgaged your house. You've downsized. People are with lack of sympathy talking about you must have had to sell your quad and your snowmobile. No, you've sold other things, right? You've sold your truck so the bank didn't come take it from you. You've cashed in on your savings. You've forgotten about the trip. People understand. The reason why I want to spell this out like this is because I have friends that work, or more accurately, are not working right now in oil and gas too. And one of the things that I think we have to establish before we even start this conversation is that we are in this together. And whether or not you believe that specific government action by way of investment or bluster or otherwise is productive or counterproductive, it doesn't make you an enemy of the state. And don't allow politicians to portray you like that, nor their supporters. Alberta's premier came out hot yesterday while the rest of the world was talking about the inauguration, about the return of America to a state of decency. Well, the world was talking about, did you hear Garth Brooks sing Amazing Grace? Did you hear Lady Gaga sing the Star-Spangled Banner? Do you marvel at all of this? Wow, look at this. Wow, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, his first phone call is going to be to the prime minister, his first official diplomatic phone call. His first phone call to an international leader is going to be to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Canada. You'll remember Donald Trump did not extend Canada that courtesy. Trump made a statement very clearly, another president, right out of the gates, that Canada was not top on his list of priorities. Donald Trump did not treat Canada well at all. And Donald Trump did not build Keystone XL either. As a matter of fact, he tried to ram it through with policy that made it susceptible to cancellation, which is exactly what happened yesterday. And it prompted Premier Jason Kenney to take to a podium and start off with this.
I wish the new administration and the people of the United States every success in the coming years. With over $100 billion worth of exports to the United States every year, Alberta has a broad range of important issues to work on to create prosperity for people on both sides of the border. But as friends and allies of the United States, we are deeply disturbed that one of President Biden's first actions in office has been to rescind the presidential permit for the Keystone XL pipeline border crossing. This is a gut punch for the Canadian and Alberta economies. Sadly, it is an insult directed at the United States' most important ally and trading partner on day one of a new administration. Today, as I speak, over 2,000 women and men have lost their jobs, are heading home from good-paying union jobs as a result of this decision. My thoughts go to every one of them as they cope with the distressing consequences of today's decision. We'll continue to fight for them and for the 59,000 jobs that this project would create.
So Jason Kenney out of the gates, the great fighter of union jobs, by the way, you heard that, talking about respect, talking about the fact that America is insulting Canada, and he's demanding more respect. And here's where it got really interesting. If you watched the entire, his first address was about 20 minutes, and then he started taking questions, maybe 15 minutes, started taking questions. And he was getting more and more and more and more and more agitated. And you're going to be watching right now, and some of you are going to be saying, well, yeah, they canceled Keystone XL. Keystone is integral to the success of our economy, to the export of our most important natural resource. Of course he's upset. He invested $1.5 billion of taxpayers' money in a pipeline, hoping it would help keep that pipeline afloat, and it didn't. He lost that high-profile gamble, and he's ticked off. And then this.
I'm just wondering if, at this juncture, Premier, you have regrets about your investment in the pipeline.
No, absolutely not. I think any responsible Alberta government would have made that decision. Had we not done so, the project would have died last year because of the perceived political risk associated with it. Much like the federal government took its ownership position in in Trans Mountain at a minimum cost of $7 billion, much like the previous Alberta government risked $3.8 billion only to move, in principle, to move 120,000 barrels a day of crude by rail for only 3 years, an arrangement where we ended up losing several $100 million. This was a $1 billion preferred equity investment to begin construction, to create facts on the ground, as I said at the time, to take control of our own economic destiny.
To take control of our economic destiny. We've heard that from Jason Kenney before. Our economic destiny. It's a very dominionist. It's kind of like if you grew up in the church with the old sort of, the old Bible preachers that banged on the pulpit. And if you're like me and you grew up like that, you recognize talk like this, economic destiny. In a way, do you regret, a fair question there from Kelly Kreiderman, a reporter, do you regret this investment, this $1.5 billion? And when he says billion, he's talking US dollars. It's $1.5 billion. Do you regret it? Well, Justin Trudeau did this and Rachel Notley did this. He goes on and on about the oil by rail contract, which cost us several $100 million because Jason Kenney backed out of the deal. That's why it cost Alberta several $100 million. But here's the point. We're not here to talk about Rachel Notley and oil by rail. In fact, it has nothing to do with Keystone XL and Jason Kenney betting on a pipeline that was so dead in the water. Like Michaela McQuaid from Eurasia Group told us yesterday, the energy analyst at Washington, D.C., they've been calling it, in D.C., the zombie pipeline, the pipeline Obama couldn't kill and Trump couldn't build. Rachel Notley didn't get Jason Kenney to invest $1.5 billion into a pipeline dead in the water. Justin Trudeau didn't get Jason Kenney to invest $1.5 billion in a pipeline dead in the water. And in fact, the pipeline, and I'm not here to defend Trudeau, it has nothing to do with Justin Trudeau. The fair question is, what does Trudeau do on his call with Biden today to try to get Keystone's decision reversed? But the pipeline that Trudeau bought into is being built. And thank God it is. Because with Lines 3 expansion and Lines 5, getting into the weeds here on pipelines, but those are being challenged in Michigan, Line 5 specifically. Energy East dead, Northern Gateway dead, Keystone XL dead. Thank God they have TMX. So Kenney drops this bomb, which is unbelievable. Again, to state the obvious, let me point out, we're talking day one, the inauguration of an American president, a new administration, the eyes of the world on America. Every 24-hour news network in the world, not just CNN and Fox and MSNBC, but Al Jazeera and CBC and CTV and the BBC and every other 24-hour cable outlet on the planet watching the White House. Here's Alberta's Premier's idea.
If retroactively rescinding a presidential permit for a pipeline border crossing is validated, if today's decision is validated, if there is no pushback from Canada's government, I think it merely encourages those organizations to turn to use this tactic in their effort to landlock Canadian energy.
So trade sanctions. The ant wants to impose sanctions on the elephant on day one of the elephant's administration. Now, does Alberta roll over? Does Canada simply accept the cancellation of Keystone XL? Probably not. Wouldn't play well with Kenney's base. But realistically speaking, it's time that Albertans held the Premier accountable for A, the decisions he's making with your money, and B, the way he communicates on behalf of Alberta. Here's what some people had to say on Twitter yesterday as Jason Kenney was speaking. Andrew Leach, the economist out of a University of Alberta that was on the show earlier this week, Jason Kenney is very mad that the Biden administration moved forward at the speed of business and with limited consultation. Fascinating. Coal, teachers' pensions, 911 dispatch. Max Fawcett, former editor, Alberta Oil, panelist on this show. Does Jason Kenney not understand that we export the overwhelming majority of our oil and gas to the U.S.? Picking a trade war with them over a pipeline when they're basically our only customer is just remarkably, almost impossibly daft. Frank McCallum, listening to Kenney complain that Canada was not respectfully consulted before Keystone was canceled, is just a bit rich, coming from the guy who, without consultation, took control of my pension money. Chris Turner, author of a book called The Patch on the oil industry, lives in Calgary. I'm listening to Kenney try to chastise the incoming administration over Keystone. It's hard to imagine a veteran politician misreading a day's mood any worse than this. I'm not even going into particulars, he says. It's rewarmed ethical oil, Ezra Levant's argument, plus Rotary Club speechifying on Alberta's oil and gas environmental record, plus cheap shots at Trudeau. It's shockingly bad even for Kenney. Mark, listening in from Utah, says, imagine what could have happened in Alberta had the government invested that $1.5 billion in tax credits and incentives for tech startups. The building blocks for a tech boom are there. Now they just need a push. Low corporate tax rate does nothing for startups losing money in the first 3 to 5 years. Well, how about this? Yeah, let's look at that one, Sam. I appreciate that one. This is from the Alberta Medical Doctors War Room. They're proud that they have more followers than Alberta's official war room. They say, Dear President, please ignore Premier Kenney. He does not speak for us. You can tell Albertans are excited about the historic inauguration of you and Vice President Kamala Harris today because of, this tweet will have more likes and retweets than our embarrassing premiers. Love your friends and allies in Alberta. And it's true, it does. You can let me know what you think on this. I mean, we're getting emails right now. The inbox is slammed. We've got comments here on the YouTube line. I haven't even looked at our hashtag yet because a lot of you have a lot to say. In many ways, it's not so much what Jason Kenney is arguing. Alberta oil is important to Alberta's economy. True. Alberta is important to Canada's economy. True. Canadian energy is important to the United States and its energy security. True. It's frustrating and maddening for an American administration to cancel a pipeline without consultation. True. These things are true. They're undeniable. Albertans are hurting. Yes, people are laid off as a result of this. True. Now, Kenney's taking credit for a lot of the jobs that would be created here on the American side of the border and have nothing to do with him, but still, it doesn't matter. Semantics will call it. In a lot of ways, it's not what Jason Kenney says, it's how he says it. And you wonder if out of spite, somebody like the President of the United States, the most powerful person on the planet, might look at him and just go, pfft. I saw somebody yesterday say, I can imagine the president even wanting to build a pipeline saying no just because it's Jason Kenney that's demanding it. Jason Kenney's got a real way with words, and that's not a compliment. We're going to talk about Canada-U.S. trade with lawyer Mark Warner in 30 seconds. Really quickly, wanted to remind you that conversations like this are made possible by the team at Kubi Energy, who offers their amazing support to us growing our journey. And they're proud to employ certified installers, journeyman electricians in BC and Alberta to make sure that your commercial or residential solar install goes off without a hitch. They don't want you doing paperwork. They don't want you getting bogged down in all the details. They handle it all from start to finish. Offices in Kamloops and Edmonton and rapidly growing. You want to see an example of the work? Check out the Edmonton Convention Center and check them out online at kubienergy.ca. Mark Warner, I've been looking forward to this conversation. Mark and I have spoken several times over the years, and the guy gets what's going on. He's a lawyer that practices out of Ontario as well as New York City, and his area of expertise, specifically international trade. Mark, welcome to Real Talk, and thanks for making time for us today.
Nice chatting with you again.
So, Mark, we know obviously one of the key focal points here of the early indicators of what the economic challenges might look like between this new administration and Canada's levels of government, of course, centers around Keystone XL. What are your thoughts on how this was handled by the Biden administration? Not exactly a shock. He said he would do this, and he did it on day one.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think any of it's a shock. I think we had to expect it. I mean, I think what's a bit strange, perhaps, is the extent to which he has loaded up his cabinet with the environmental side of the argument. He's got Obama's former Secretary of State, John Kerry, as a special roving ambassador on the environment, and he has a lot of other people who were in the Obama administration on that issue. I say that's surprising because he still has a rather tenuous hold on the Senate, and so, the incoming chair of the Energy Committee is going to be, the very conservative Democrat, Joe Manchin of West Virginia. So what it's not clear to me is whether this is really the end of the road for Keystone, or whether this is more of a invitation to come back and have a more extended conversation about how you could situate that project in something larger. It seems a little bit unlikely, but it does seem to me the politics of it in the United States aren't 100% clear to me, given it's not as if, they don't have a parliamentary system. This is always the issue I have when I talk about trade issues in Canada. Everyone thinks, our prime ministers get to tell everybody what to do and they all fall in line. And if they don't, they go off and go fishing or something. But that's not how it works in the US. Each one of these senators thinks that they could be a president or should be a president. And in this particular case, Biden has 50-50. And if Manchin were to cross over and become a Republican, it would be 51-49 for the Republicans. So it seems to me it's not as if we're talking about a guy who's a titan. We're talking about a guy who has to send certain clear messages to his left and to the environmental part of his base, to Bernie Sanders and that crowd. But it's not as if he can just become, Greta Thunberg on steroids, right? It's not. I don't think he can do that. So what's not clear to me is to what extent are we throwing in the towel too early by talking about fighting in this bombastic way, by moving to talking about how we might Alberta or TC Energy might recoup some of their expenses, or has the company itself made a business decision that it no longer wants to pursue this and is looking for an out? That's kind of my question.
Obviously, the implications of a completed Keystone XL pipeline are enormous, and they're huge to the fates of Alberta. And I know that there are people in Alberta that don't have an appetite for the pipeline, but there are, I can safely say, more people that would be cheering for the success of the pipeline. And it's important to reiterate that criticizing a provincial government's approach on the file is not acting as an enemy of the state as it's trying to be portrayed. Mark, from your perspective, what does it do when a government leader like Premier Jason Kenney starts talking about economic sanctions against Canada's most important trading partner, the United States, on day one of a new administration? I mean, your wheelhouse is trade. What does that do?
Well, I don't think Americans are all that plugged into Canada in general, to be very honest with you, let alone a provincial premier. I think Biden has enough difficulty with what he has to face with the pandemic and with basically not really having a very strong control over the Senate. So I think it would be more concerning if he were to hear those threats coming from a national government, and we're not hearing it yet. I think, if a case is filed, if either TC Energy or somehow Alberta, through whatever enterprise it used to make its equity investment in the project, were to try to file an investor state case against the United States, that would be more concerning. Obviously, so that would be an issue that that would, I think, become more of a diplomatic spat. But at this stage, I don't think the Democrats or the Biden people are surprised by the Canadian response, and they're probably gently whispering there are other things we can work together on, like Buy American and common policy on emissions and autos, and just don't make life miserable for us on this. And I think if I looked at the Prime Minister's statement last night, and to me it kind of read like that's what he was trying to say. This is not a fight that he wants to have. Mark,
one of the things that Alberta's premier made clear yesterday, he kept reiterating the fact, and I understand what he's getting at, that the permit was revoked in a retroactive context. If you were retained by the government of Alberta, if you were retained by TC Energy, what argument do you think that you would make? What argument do you think they have to try to turn the tide on this?
So keep in mind this, on the first day of the Trump presidency, Trump signed an executive order basically saying that everything else that Obama had done before, having an executive order that stopped Keystone the first time, that was out the window. So it's all of this arbitrariness that the project's on one day, it's not on the next day. We follow the science one day, and it's that arbitrariness that you then under the real area. There are two areas under investor-state dispute settlement that people claim under. One is expropriation, or that some policy measure is tantamount to expropriation. It looks like you're expropriating. Companies haven't been all that successful. Investors haven't been all that successful under that prong. But the other prong is that whether in fact the country met a minimum standard of treatment of the investor. And that's where companies or investors have been more successful. And if you start saying to people, this is not really how democratic market-based economies act, where you're approving something and changing the rules and doing it arbitrarily every day, how can you have a stable investment if that's what you're doing? So I think that would be the best ground to succeed on. It would take time. There's no guarantee. I think what makes it a little bit difficult this time is that when Trump signed his executive order, basically saying that the project could go forward with a nationwide permit, he also retained that right of the president, any president, to unilaterally revoke it without having to explain why, which is itself kind of bizarre, but that's what he did. So that's the kind of structure the argument would follow. And around that, it would be a question of fact. Could you show that there was an arbitrariness to it? We had a case. The best case to think about of this is in Canada, is Abitibi-Bowater, where Premier Danny Williams of Newfoundland basically overnight took back the licenses for Abitibi-Bowater had to harvest trees in the forests there. For some reason, they stopped harvesting. I guess it wasn't commercial. And Danny Williams said, well, if you're not going to harvest it, we're taking it back. And Abitibi-Bowater sued Canada under NAFTA for $500 million. And Stephen Harper settled for $130 million. Now, what is true is no American, no case has ever, no NAFTA panel has ever gone against the United States. And you could ask yourself whether, in fact, an American government might sit around and say, we'll just settle this as Stephen Harper did to make it go away. Probably unlikely, we don't know, but there's an issue there, whether that's something that would be the precedent you'd look to, would be what we did with Abitibi-Bowater.
Mark, let me ask you in closing, completely different file. Obviously, premiers are concerned, Canadians are concerned, and I would imagine that the federal government behind the scenes, the PMO, is trying to find a way to put this fire out. Pfizer telling Canada simply they're going to have to wait. There are other international governments, other federal governments that are receiving shipments. Canada's are delayed. I've seen some speculation with regards as to why that might be. Canada fighting price wars against pharmaceutical manufacturers, the fact that our orders are a little bit smaller in batch size than some of the European countries. What do you make of this, and what leg does Canada have to stand on when it comes to dealing with Pfizer?
Well, yeah, that's a slightly different issue. I think what's going on with that particular case is that because of our sort of fear of Donald Trump's arbitrariness, mercurial nature around personal protective equipment earlier in the pandemic, when we had the issue of stopping the sale of the masks across the border, I think the government, when it negotiated these contracts for vaccines, sort of tried to get sourced from supply outside of the United States. And I think they thought they were very smart in doing that. Normally, obviously, supply chains are north-south. So once we opted to be supplied from Europe, keep in mind that Pfizer's vaccine, COVID vaccine, is really a German company's vaccine, a company called BioNTech. And the German government put a lot of money into BioNTech. It just wasn't small enough to manufacture this on it by itself, so it partnered with Pfizer. So the position we're in is that company has to ramp up its production in Europe, and it's got to shut down. Well, if you're looking at that and you're talking about a company that's German, where the German government's put a lot of money into, where the German government's put a lot of money into, I think it shouldn't be shocking that the Germans are reacting pretty much the way the Americans have. They've put less shots in the arm than we have in Canada, and they're saying to Pfizer and to BioNTech, we want to go before you. And I don't. It's not the sort of thing we want to hear, but it's not, I think, to me, it's not surprising.
Okay. Mark, I can't tell you how much I want to say to people, you and I have been speaking for years in my previous employ on a previous show on another radio platform, and it's really great to introduce you to this audience. I'm looking forward to continued conversations. You do such a good job of making sense of issues that exist, and they're not all negative. Opportunities oftentimes, too, between Canada and the U.S. Thanks for this morning.
Thank you. It's been nice chatting.
You bet.
Good
Mark
luck.
Warner is an author and a speaker, a media commentator, obviously. He practices international competition, trade, and investment law in both Ontario and New York State. You can find him online on Twitter at Ma Law. That's MAAW. LAW. Of course, we link to that on our Twitter page. You can follow me on Ryan Jesperson. Every morning, we tell you who's coming up on the show, including Jay Hill in just a moment, the leader of Canada's Maverick Party. Jay's a veteran of federal politics. I'm going to pick his brain a little bit on what we're talking about here, but more importantly, what's this party all about? The news is coming up in just a second. Wanted to remind you that at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge, they are ready for an onslaught of interest in the 2021 Dodge and specifically Jeep lineup, including the return of the Jeep Grand Wagoneer. This the full-size luxury SUV that's turning heads already. People keep looking online for sneak photos and videos of this addition to the lineup. It's going to go head-to-head against all the top-shelf luxury SUVs. Plus, the 7-passenger Jeep Grand Cherokee. They've not done one before. 2021, it rolls out at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. They want your business. Go see Scott and his team at those two locations. The team at Friesen Brothers is very excited to be getting set to make their debut right here in the Metro Edmonton region. That's right, Friesen Brothers getting set to open its 15th Alberta store coming up in less than 60 days. And we're going to keep that countdown going. They've been supporting Alberta farmers for years, more than 6 decades. Alberta beef, Alberta turkey, Alberta pork, Alberta produce when they can, Alberta milled flour in their sourdough. Friesen Brothers is Alberta grown, Alberta owned. Sam, let's take a quick look at the headlines. Here's what's making news today. As you heard out of the gates, Alberta's Premier Jason Kenney is calling on Ottawa, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to press Washington. He wants Prime Minister Trudeau to essentially use that phone call today to ask President Joe Biden to consult with Canada, to consult with Alberta before canceling Keystone XL, saying if it doesn't happen, Kenney wants to see trade sanctions implemented. He says that's economist Dr. Jack Mintz's idea, says it's a valid one. Many people debating the wisdom of that today. On the COVID file, Alberta's positivity rate has dropped below 5% for the first time in 12 weeks. This is thanks to COVID-19 measures brought in late last year. That, according to Dr. Dina Hinshaw, Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, said during her daily update yesterday that the last time the rate was in the range it is now, 4.5%, was back around Halloween, saying that's a good thing, but says Albertans need to continue building on that success. That's the same message in Ontario, where they're seeing their numbers drop as well. Premier Doug Ford and Ontario's Minister of Health saying it's not time to walk away from that lockdown yet. Jay Hill has spent a lot of time in Ottawa. As a matter of fact, first elected as a member of Parliament with the Reform Party back in 1993. Served in various roles for different manifestations of the federal Conservative Party over the years, including Chief Whip, the opposition critic, National Defence, Transport, Justice. He's the only member of Parliament to have served as Whip 4 times for the Reform Party, the Canadian Alliance, the Progressive Conservative Coalition, and the Conservative Party of Canada. It's probably why his Twitter handle is Whip for Life. Jay is now the leader of the Maverick Party and joins us live on this Thursday morning. Jay, welcome to Real Talk, and thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be with you.
Jay, we've got questions from our audience members. We mentioned you're going to be on the show, asked what they wanted you to talk about. I want to get into a sense of what the Maverick Party is all about. But why don't I ask you right now, I mean, you want to lead members of Parliament, you want to lead a party in Parliament next election. How would you be handling this relationship? It changes every time there's a change in administration between Canada and the U.S. How would you protect the West's interests with a new president?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question, Ryan. About 2 weeks ago, unfortunately, it coincided with some other pretty important world events. We released what we call our Option A, which is modernizing the Canadian. Constitution to address some historical and current grievances by Western Canada. The first of 5 constitutional amendments that we placed before the public a couple of weeks ago is the one that would include market access as the sole and exclusive responsibility and right of provinces as opposed to the federal government. As you know, probably that the provinces have exclusive jurisdiction for the development, the exploration of their natural resources, but they don't have the right to market access. That's solely in the purview of the federal government. And right now, of course, we have a federal government led by a prime minister that has unequivocally indicated for years now that he wants to phase out the oil sands in particular. He's no friend to the oil and gas sector. He's passed laws that are clearly detrimental to our number one industry out in Western Canada. And yet we have the ridiculous situation where we're turning to him, as our premier is right now, to try to engage the new U.S. president to overturn this rejection of the Keystone XL pipeline permit. So I would say how we would address that is have the provinces be responsible for that. And then I would expect that Premiers Kenney and Moe, for example, would be in Washington today stating their case, making a very strong case for that pipeline to continue.
Yeah, you got to wonder, and I'm a proud Albertan, Jay, but you got to wonder if Premier Kenney, Premier Moe could even get a meeting with President Biden today. You know, I hate having to have this conversation because I know that I'm going to be at risk of oversimplifying everything right now. But let me present to you that you know the federal government. I know that people are going to say that Justin Trudeau wants to kill the oil sands. 3 quick points. You know, your former boss Stephen Harper talked as well about phasing out the oil sands over the next 100 years or so. He used the same language. The federal government bought the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and I'll let you answer. The federal government bought the Trans Canada Pipeline, and if you're talking about laws that make life more difficult for Alberta energy producers, and I don't deny that that's the fact. I don't deny that the carbon tax and the carbon levies are inconvenient for the bottom line of corporations. That's true, and for people's households and for farmers, including my family, that's true. But if you look at what international investors are saying and you look where trends are going, a lot of times it takes meaningful action on the environment front to get things like pipelines passed. So as an alternative, what policy would you like to see? If Justin Trudeau's an enemy of the oil sands with what he's doing, including buying a pipeline, what would you do differently?
Well, I would completely disagree with the premise of all 3 of your points, Ryan. I think that Prime Minister Harper unequivocally stated that he believed that Canada was a superpower when it came to energy. He was a strong advocate and, dare I say, cheerleader for the industry throughout his time as Prime Minister. And I think there's ample evidence for anyone that wants to check on that to document that and see that that's as far as your other points. I mean, what would we advocate? We would advocate that it's ridiculous, it's hypocritical for all political parties to say, well, you know what, the ship has sailed when it comes to having to address man-made climate change and carbon reduction. Yes, that's true, but yes, that is also the fact that Canada is making huge strides in those areas. We have the technology, we're the worldwide leader in the reduction of carbon on many fronts. We can export that technology, Ryan, to the world, especially the large emitters. That should be our focus. That should be our emphasis. We should have a prime minister and government that is traveling the world, well, at least once COVID's contained, and selling that technology to the other emitters, the ones that are really creating the problem. It's hypocritical to suggest that Canada, with 2% of the emissions can somehow clean up the world's climate. It's just not going to happen. And it's highly erroneous for them to try, any party, to try to convince Canadians that that's going to be the case.
Jay, with regards to the Maverick Party itself and your draw to the Maverick Party, someone with your pedigree, with your federal political experience, with your name recognition, with your ties and involvement and allegiance to the Conservative Party of Canada, it's obviously a story, and it was a story, and it is a story when you agreed to lead this party forward. I think a lot of people are, there's been a name change. The word Wexit is not in the name anymore, but people are trying to figure out what the Maverick Party's all about. What's it all about, and what drew you to the party? What drew you away from the Conservative Party of Canada?
Well, in a nutshell, Ryan, because I know time is of the essence.
We got lots.
It always is with programs like yours. We've got lots. Okay. Really what happened for me was increasingly over the last few years, when I wasn't actively engaged in the public domain, in federal politics, which was my purview, if you will, for 17 years as a member of parliament. What happened was, after the 2019 election, when it became extremely clear to me that Canada, as it's currently structured and governed, does not work in the best interests of Western Canada. It just doesn't work. And we can go into all of the litany of reasons for that that have become evident over the last number of years, decades and decades, if truth be known. But following the election, when if you look at the numbers, clearly Central and Eastern Canada re-elected Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's Liberals, despite most of certainly the prairies, but arguably the majority of Western Canada voting Conservative. And what that proved to me, after all my time supporting the Conservative Party of Canada, and as you indicated prior to that, Reform Party, was that our current system does not work. So one of two things, once you come to that realization, one of two things has to happen. Either we have to change the way Canada is governed to make it fair and to ensure that there's adequate protection in the Parliament of Canada for the regions that are less populous, or you have to look at secession as the only other viable option. So that is why the Maverick Party, under my interim leadership, has developed a two-track or twin-track approach to change. And we say that we support greater self-determination for Western Canada, either through constitutional change or the creation, or at least laying the foundation for the creation of an independent nation. So it's a twin-track approach. Both people in Western Canada, both Westerners that have not yet given up on Canada and want to be involved in a political party, should find a welcome home in Maverick. And also those that are strident separatists that believe that Canada is never going to change to treat the West fairly, also should find a home in the Maverick Party.
But I don't know if realistically, Jay, I find it hard to believe that you would believe that you can have a party that could comfortably house people that still believe in the idea of Canada and people that believe in an independent or sovereign separate Alberta or separate West. And I'm not even going to say West because there's no way that BC would be in. How can you believe that you could build a party with those two different groups of people with wildly different convictions on what a nation should look like?
Well, I believe, Ryan, and I think if you look at it objectively, what our mission statement is about, which I just laid out, I think if you look at it objectively, you would agree that there is a welcoming home in Maverick Party for both those disparate groups, and I'll explain why. Obviously, I have said that we don't want to repeat the error that Quebec made when they attempted to secede both in 1980 and 1995. And what they did was they ramped up their rhetoric about separatism to a fever pitch. And as they did that, the majority of Quebecers, by a slim majority, admittedly, in 1995, that were nervous about Quebec going on their own, increasingly fell on the side of the argument of voting no for secession. If the West is serious about laying the foundation for independence, then we need those people. Polls consistently show the majority of Westerners still have not yet given up on Canada. So how do you ensure that eventually they will get to the point of frustration and alienation to the point where they want to form their own country? Well, you include them in the discussion, and you show them that Canada is never, ever going to change if you're a separatist, if you're on that side of the argument. And so that's what we're saying. We're saying, and if by some minor miracle, the rest of the country says, whoa, we want Canada as it is. We want to ensure that Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, large parts of British Columbia still feel at home in Canada. So we're willing to modernize our archaic constitution and method of government to make sure they feel welcome and we treat them fairly. If that were to happen, I suspect that the vast majority of people right now that are sitting in the separatist camp would say, you know what, let's stay in Canada, let's build Canada, because they are clearly indicating they're willing to modernize this constitution along the lines that we've been advocating, for the last 100 years.
Jay Hill's our guest. He's leader of the Maverick Party. Kyle is watching in this morning. He says, Jay, how do you engage somebody like me who is completely against separation? What are, he asked for three things, whatever you feel inclined to offer up. He says, what are three things we currently face as a province that would be immediately solved by separation? I guess what Kyle's asking you to do is make the compelling argument for separation. How does it make life easier for Alberta?
Well, I think that both culturally and economically, there's no doubt that you can look at the situation, Kyle, and you would have to say that a separate entity made up of the majority of the Western provinces as they exist today would be better off. I mean, if we didn't send billions of dollars to the rest of the country and we had those funds, that resources to invest in our own futures and in our own level of government, we would be better off. Secondly, hopefully, and I would say absolutely, we would structure the government for the Western nation, the new Western nation, vastly different to the way that Canada is structured. In other words, we would have a Triple E Senate in our new country that would protect the less populated regions of our new country against the cities like Calgary and Edmonton and perhaps Vancouver, if indeed the entire province of BC joined the new country. So we would be better off in the sense that we would be more equitably governed than what we see today. And, I think thirdly, as I said, when you look at whether it's agriculture that I'm very familiar with, or whether it's forestry, mining, oil and gas, hydroelectric, you name it, we have an abundance of natural resources, which unfortunately we have federal governments and in this day and age that it's making it more and more difficult for us to adequately harvest those natural resources for the betterment of ourselves and future generations. And so I would say that there could be strong arguments. I would look forward to a debate on that. And I would encourage you to take a look at Maverick and look at our twin track approach. If you're, as you say, Kyle, if you're not a separatist, many members in Maverick are not. They're still holding out hope that the rest of Canada will look at our constitutional amendments and opt for modernizing Canada's constitution and the way in which the country's governed to treat all outer regions, whether it's the West or the Maritimes, in a fair and equitable manner.
Jay, on our live comments here on YouTube, I see that Max Fawcett's watching in, former editor of Alberta Oil. I'm sure you're familiar with his work. He says, I'd be curious to know what Jay thinks would happen if control over market access is given over to the provinces like you've proposed. He says, including the province of BC. In what universe would they support new oil pipelines? I mean, the only reason we'll acknowledge the only reason that TMX is being built is against BC's wishes. Begrudgingly, they're issuing permits because the courts have ordered them to do so. Does Max make a valid point?
No. With all due respect, the fact of the matter is we couldn't possibly be any worse off. I hear this argument all the time. It says, well, if, for example, Alberta and Saskatchewan had provincial referendums as per the Clarity Act, and opted to secede from the country, we would be landlocked. And I hear this all the time because of British Columbia. Well, there's a couple of things on that, Ryan and Max. The one is that the one thing we learned a lot of things from the 1995 Quebec referendum. But one of the things we learned was that the courts ruled that if the country is divisible, and they decided that if a province follows the correct procedure, that it is divisible, then so too are provinces. And I think that's largely attributable to the Indigenous people in Quebec who said, well, wait a minute, just because the majority of Quebecers might vote to leave the country doesn't mean that we will. And so that presented a certain, I'll call it dilemma for the courts and for our country, and whereby you also have to look at whether a province is divisible. So when we look at British Columbia, for example, there is no way that we know until a referendum is held with hopefully a full and respectful debate about the pros and cons of independence, whether all of British Columbia would vote not to join, arguably, with Alberta and Saskatchewan in forming a new nation. It could very easily be the fact that you would get the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island saying, no, we want to stay with Canada. And they would have to deal with all of that comes with that in the sense of being completely, should I say, landlocked themselves. I mean, they would have to negotiate with the new country for access to the rest of Canada if that was their choice to stay. But the remainder of British Columbia, the interior, and for sure the north, and for sure my riding, which is almost geographically a quarter of British Columbia up in the northeast corner, runs up to the Yukon. I feel comfortable that the majority of that riding, certainly that region, would vote for separation. So you'd end up with an interesting situation, to say the least, where geographically large parts of the province might wish to secede and vote that way in a referendum, and that you would have perhaps tidewater access through Prince Rupert, Stewart, Kitimat. All of those ports are up in the north. So even without Vancouver, you would still have access for our natural resources to tidewater. So lots of interesting scenarios, Ryan, that none of us know. I've been saying ever since I took over this role in the summer that I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know of anyone that does. All we can do is try to work forward and answer the questions as best we can for the moment, and look to the people for guidance.
Jay, I'd love to see oil at $120 a barrel like everybody else. I remember what Alberta's economy looked like. I remember what I spent my prosperity check on when Ralph sent us $400 a piece. We all remember what the boom was like and what it allowed us to do, and what it meant for Canada's bottom line as well. The fact of the matter is the game has changed with regards to global energy markets, with regards to the cost of production, with regards to the costs that are leaving. I think of French giant Total and others that are walking away, writing off oil sands assets. Do you believe that Alberta's lost a leg to stand on with regards to making the argument to its own citizens? As are Western Canadians that are envisioning a time where we don't pay federal taxes to Ottawa and instead keep them in more of an insular fashion? Do we need a reality check, maybe? I mean, has the game changed? We take a look at how Alberta relied on Ottawa through the course of this pandemic and through the drop in the global energy market. Many people without the CERB or without some sort of federal subsidy would have been totally screwed. Is the game different now than it was 10 years ago?
Well, Ryan, I mean, in all fairness to your question, I think that you'd have to look at other nations that have built up ample reserves. Look to Norway and see what would have happened had the West been a separate entity where we could have put the billions upon billions of dollars that has been siphoned off to Central and Eastern Canada over the last decades. And imagine what we would have had for a reserve to support our citizens through this current global pandemic.
Yeah, but Jay, we didn't and we haven't. Like, that's not the reality, right? You're talking about starting something now.
That's right. And I am saying about starting right. We should have started it years ago, but you're right. We are today. And the reality of your situation is you discount the fact that global demand for energy is increasing. I hear this all the time. Well, the day of oil and gas is over. We've got to phase this out. We've got to look at the, renewable alternatives, this type of thing. The reality is that and thankfully, as the economic situation improves for the third world, they are looking for many of the comforts and the benefits that countries like Canada have. And that comes with energy. And so the oil and gas, in particular, the oil reserves are going to be supplied by someone. The question is globally, do you want people and countries to supply that adhere to the highest standards of environmental protection like Canada, or do you want the Saudi Arabia and the Venezuela and African nations to supply that energy? Because someone is going to supply it, Ryan. And so, when we have a government that purposely tries to hamstring our number one economic driver in this country, which has been oil and gas, and they try to further restrict that and drive away investment with bills like C-48 and C-69 to make it virtually impossible for this industry to flourish, as you said you would wish it to, based upon your own personal experience.
Yeah.
When we have a federal government that does that, instead of being a cheerleader for our industry worldwide and holding it up as the example that it is for how to environmentally and with the proper labor standards develop this industry, instead of holding it up as the shining example that I believe that it is on the world stage, instead attacks our own industry and drives investment out of our country so that it's back, those dollars are back in Texas or Oklahoma or North Dakota, where there's also huge oil reserves. How do we say as Westerners that that's just fine? Tens of thousands, if not more, Westerners out of work. A big part of that, as you suggest, is because of a global reduction in the price of oil. But equally, a big part of that is because of how our Liberal government is handling this key industry in Western Canada.
So Jay, ultimately, between we could be going back to the polls in a few months. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the next federal election. I would imagine you're not knocking on doors in Quebec or New Brunswick to try to run candidates there. But correct me if I'm wrong. But how are you mobilizing, and what does the Maverick Party rollout look like with regards to candidates, where they are, how many there are by the next time that Canadians vote?
Well, obviously, it's going to depend. Put it in perspective in the sense, Ryan, if you would please, that this party is less than a year old. In fact, we've only really been active for the last 6 months or so. I got involved the end of June. You can imagine, and I have firsthand experience having done my bit up in northeastern British Columbia to launch and build the Reform Party of Canada that eventually became a major political force in the country. But it takes time. And so to answer your question, I have to ask people to please reflect back on how little time so far the Maverick Party has had. Secondly, you ask about candidates. We are actively recruiting candidates now. We've had, and I don't want to get into a numbers game here, but we have had quite a number step forward and want to carry the banner for Maverick. We have said as a party, we are only running in Western Canada. We have no intention of running east of Manitoba. And so we've addressed the whole vote splitting fear that the Conservatives in particular are leveling at Maverick, trying to drive would-be supporters and electors away from our party and keep them in the Conservative fold. So we can talk about that. So we have a number of candidates that are would-be candidates, prospective candidates that are going through the process. As you indicate, that's why we have to do that right now, because we have the uncertainty of a minority government. Nobody understands, I don't think, that uncertainty better than myself, having been in 3 minority governments, first Paul Martin's and then 2 by Stephen Harper. And both of those latter 2 minority governments, I was in what I would call a key caucus position. First as chief opposition whip, where I had to negotiate daily, sometimes hourly, with the other parties in order to have support for our legislative agenda. And then in the second one, as the House leader, the government House leader, to try and again negotiate with the other parties. So very familiar with the fragility of minority governments. And that's what we have right now. It's only being kept in power by Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. That's the only reason that this government has not already fallen. of course, under our system, Justin Trudeau can go to the Governor General and ask for an election at any time. That's his right as a Prime Minister to do that. And so we, as you say, we could be in election. There's a lot widespread speculation. It could come as early as a month or so from now.
So Jay, obviously, obviously you'd, if I say what's your ideal circumstance, you're going to say, well, you'd be Prime Minister and you'd have enough, MP.
No,
but
that's not my ideal circumstance.
Let me forecast.
Let me finish, Ryan, because you just erroneously conveyed to your
I teed up a question. I teed up a question.
It's not ideal.
I was teeing up a question, Jay. I was teeing up a question. Here's my question. I did not want to discount you nor place a ceiling on your ambition. That's all I was doing. My question was going to be, is your ideal circumstance Aaron O'Toole as leader of either a majority government or a minority government, and a Maverick Party playing the role that the NDP is playing right now for the Liberals? In other words, would you like to have something where the balance of power, the ability to make policy decisions, has to go through the Maverick Party?
Yes.
All right. Hey, listen.
Next question.
Next question. I love it. Well, there you go. We wound up on the same page on something, Jay. Let me tell you this. It will not surprise you to know not everybody watching agrees with me. Not everybody watching agrees with you. And the whole point of this show is to have real talk about issues that Canadians care about. And I'm grateful that you agreed to join us here today. Thank you for your time on this, Jay.
Well, I think that's positive. One of the things I've said, and of course I've believed this throughout my political tenure, dating back to the late 80s, so quite some time now, is that one thing I love about Canada is our democracy. And I think that one of the things that is missing more and more is what I would call civil debate, where people can exchange ideas, argue passionately for their point of view, but accept that others aren't going to be coming from the same perspective. And so I've always welcomed that and continue to welcome it as the interim leader of Maverick.
All right, Jay, thanks for making yourself available this morning, and we'll talk again.
Okay. Thanks very much.
You got it. That's Jay Hill. As mentioned, former government House Leader, former Chief Government Whip. He's held senior positions in various manifestations of the Conservative Party of Canada, starting with the Reform Party back in 1993 when he was first elected as a member of Parliament. We've got a ton of action on this on our YouTube comment thread. I apologize. We're going to have to come up with a better name. I keep calling it like the YouTube comment thread, Sam. I think we can come up with a better... I mean, the text line is a way to just quickly say the text line, but it's not technically correct.
I think the actual taxonomy that YouTube uses is it refers to it as the live chat. So maybe
we
should call it the live chat. We got some comments coming in on the live chat.
The live
right
chat.
Now.
Comments on the live chat.
Right?
I like that. And then it could be like the live chat brought to you by... Right?
Oh, you want to sponsor that, hey?
Yeah. Here's the thing. The one thing, and we've got some panelists waiting here to go, and we're going to move our conversation forward, but we're never going to rush away from meaningful dialogue, and we certainly care what you have to say about what you're hearing. Here's the sense of what I'm getting. A lot of you were saying, you maybe don't agree 100%, but you're grateful we're having the conversation. That's what the show is all about. That's what it's all about. I want to bring politicians on. Some of you think that they're out to lunch. I want to bring business leaders on. You think that they're absolutely daft. I want to bring community mobilizers, contributors in their own communities that come on here and argue things that make you uncomfortable. I want to be made uncomfortable on a daily basis. And every once in a while, I want to be able to look into this lens and say, you know what? I just changed my mind. Now, on this, I have not changed my mind. And Jay and I do not see eye to eye on what I think is productive political initiative here in Western Canada. But I'm curious to pick his brain. And I appreciate Jay making himself available to take some comments. And I know a lot of you are saying, this is shameful, or I've got no more words, or you should end this interview. I want to know what we're dealing with. I want to understand what's making people tick. And, one of the things that I think really sticks out, and I said it to Jay, is that I don't believe that even he believes that a party like the Maverick Party is going to be a party that can legitimately draw full-blown separatists, full-blown Wexiteers, and people who still adore and cherish and stand by the nation of Canada as it is. There's not a chance. And he kept sort of, he even used words. If you look at some of the words that he used through the course of the interview, using words like convince. If they can't be convinced about separation, well, if that's the mandate of the party, then why on earth would somebody in love with the idea of Canada even consider it? I'm curious to hear from conservatives, and specifically social conservatives. I'm curious to know if you see this as an option. Do you see this as detrimental to Western Canada's hopes? People oftentimes say, well, the election's over. The election's over by the time that we get to Manitoba. It doesn't even matter what Alberta does. It doesn't even matter what Saskatchewan does. That's not true. That's clearly not true. What does matter is a conservative entity, in whatever way, shape, and form it's campaigning on, a conservative entity doing well in urban centers like Vancouver and Montreal and Toronto, the GTA. That's what matters. But if you take Alberta and Saskatchewan out, then you've got real problems. We have had conservative governments in past, remember, and members of parliament from the prairie provinces were a big part of that caucus. So you don't take it for granted. So if you take a look at I don't know off the top of my head what it is. I should know the number, but I think it's something like it's between 35 and 40 seats, I think. Pardon me if I'm wrong. In Alberta and Saskatchewan, 35 or 40 seats held by the Conservatives. If all of a sudden 3 or 5 or 8 or 10 of those are held by Maverick MPs, then Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives have even a longer road to hoe, right? That row becomes more daunting, more ominous. Let me know what you think about this. I'm curious to hear from the center-left crowd, but I'm really, really curious to hear from conservatives what you make of what you just heard. We're going to talk about another file that should be on the radar of all politicians in just a second. We're dedicating some meaningful time to talk on homelessness in just a second. Right now, I wanted to remind you that the team at Clean Air Club wants you to save money and breathe easier. If you visit cleanairclub.ca, you'll see how easy it is to enter the information, the size of the furnace filter you need, and then that's it. The next thing you know, sometimes the very next day, you're going to find furnace filter replacements dropped off on your front doorstep with a little gift, too. It's your way to make sure that you're replacing your furnace filter, ensuring that your family is breathing the cleanest, safest air possible in your own home. Boy, have we ever been more aware of that and right now, I don't think so. Cleanairclub.ca is where you need to go for that. We also want to thank the team at Alta Moving and Storage for their support, but don't take my word for it. Take a tweet from Jordan Reiniger, who tweeted at me just yesterday. He said, Jespo, I wanted to let you know we just used one of your partners at Alta Moving and Storage. They were fantastic. He says we had some large items we needed to be moved. We called, they came, and our problems were gone, says Jordan Reiniger. He says I'd be happy to use them again. Thanks, Jordan. You can find Alta Moving and Storage online at altastorage.ca or just follow the link, the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. Let's talk about homelessness. This is a conversation that we're going to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour on with 6 different experts. We want to check in with people that are making meaningful impacts in their communities, including right here in Alberta. And I'd like to introduce a panel. I think that's going to shine some light right now on the work that's being done among one of our most vulnerable populations, that is homeless youth. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program a good friend of mine. She's right beside me on our beautifully designed layout here on Real Talk. She's leading the team at that's Youth Empowerment and Support Services, Margo Long. Margo, welcome to Real Talk, and thanks for making time.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm happy to be here.
Cynthia Puddu at Grant MacEwan University, another valued member of our panel this morning. Cynthia, thanks for being here and good morning.
Nice to be here. I'm just going to correct my name. It's Puddu with a U at the end.
Pardon me.
That's
so
okay.
Well, you know what? It's not okay, and we spell checked it in the wrong direction. We had it right, and then we spell checked it to incorrect, and that's on this guy right here.
It's been a lifetime.
So do I say Puddu?
Yes.
Okay.
That's very good pronunciation. Thank you.
Well, I owe you one now, and I won't make the same mistake twice. And then let me make sure that I pronounce Chris's last name correctly. It's a beautiful name. Is it Beausoleil, Chris? Is that how I say it?
That's perfect.
Okay. And my understanding, does that mean beautiful sun, I think, translated?
I don't speak French, but I've been told beautiful sun, good sun, nice sun, so something along those lines, yes.
You could do worse than to be named Good Sun or Beautiful Sun. So, Chris, welcome to the show. Chris, do we say Niginan Housing Ventures? Is that who you're speaking on behalf of today?
That's correct, yeah.
What does the team do at Niginan? What's that about? When we talk about youth homelessness, let's start right there. What does your work entail?
Okay, well, prior to working for Niginan Housing Ventures, I was an Indigenous high-risk youth worker with Boyle Street Community Services in the inner city. And I did that for about 4 years. And over time, I was seeing myself having to rehouse our youth sometimes 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, because there was not just a gap in services to provide the proper support to keep them housed and to tool them up to become adults. And so I made the switch over to Niginan Housing Ventures, who started off with opening up Ambrose Place, which is a permanent supportive housing right downtown in the inner city. We work at housing some of the most complex individuals with traumatic experiences and mental health issues, as well as addictions issues. And so that's where my work started. But our goal was to look at creating Indigenous youth housing, especially for those youth who are leaving the care of children's services, because we know a lot of times those workers have no options after 18 to place them in community settings or with the proper support. So we figured we'd focus our efforts there first. And we're just beginning a new initiative at one of our new buildings called Belvedere Place, just off Fort Road. So we just opened this building in October, and we're starting to get our program up and running and focusing 6 of our units specifically for youth.
Chris, Cynthia, and Margo, I want to encourage you please to interact with one another. You don't have to wait for me to ask you a question. Let's just treat this like we're all out for coffee together, post-pandemic, obviously. Margo, give us a sense. Like, what does the lay of the land look like? What's our perspective check when it comes to youth homelessness and the need for the services that you and your team and Chris and his team and others are providing?
Thanks, Ryan. And I think, I want to start too, because I was uncomfortable taking this position, speaking on behalf of anybody. So I want to acknowledge that I'm a 5th generation settler. I'm not speaking on behalf of any population. I have been given permission by my staff and by my youth agency partners to speak about what we see and some of the findings and gaps that we have in the system. And that there are so many stories out there that we need to hear from people who have gone through and lived experience in terms of youth homelessness. But what we're seeing is there needs to be a shift from a traditional, from what I can see, focus, a very colonial focus on let's make these kids taxpayers as quickly as possible, and to really not have the empathy and understanding of what's going on. The young people that are homeless or experiencing homelessness in our city that we see at youth agencies, excuse me, have had some serious adverse childhood experiences and traumatic experiences. And we underestimate as a community, as a government, as a nation, the kind of damage that does to an individual's brain development, their self-esteem, and their trust in a community and in relationships. And until we address that intentionally, understand it, have empathy for it, and recreate a system that focuses on understanding, healing from that, and connecting and building positive relationships, we're going nowhere in prevention. Right now, our current system it prevents prevention. It creates and continues entrenchment into a cycle of addiction, abuse, suicide, and that needs to stop.
Okay, so I want to move the conversation that's a stark and effective understanding of what the reality is. I want to make sure that we understand what needs to change. There's this audience has established itself quickly in 2 months as change makers, which is really exciting to see. Now, Cynthia, I know you've been on this file this has been something that you have cared about very deeply for more than 20 years. And in reading some of your background work and your papers and your research, you've described homelessness as North America's pandemic within a pandemic. So when we talk about what needs to change, what do we need to understand?
So, something that, so I've been watching your show a lot. And so a lot of what has been talked about in a lot of your previous guests really tells a story of how homelessness, why homelessness is an issue. And one of the things that's really been standing out to me in the last week is people are really upset about open pit coal mining and the downstream effects that it has on our waterways and on our drinking water and those kinds of things. And that's a visible, tangible downstream effect. But people don't see the downstream effect of government policies that impact poverty and homelessness. So when we cut funds to AISH or make AISH more difficult to access, when we cut program unit funding to children that have disabilities in schools, that makes education more difficult. When we treat housing like a commodity and let real estate investment trust companies and large multinational companies come in and buy massive amounts of rental housing that then jack up rental housing prices, that makes housing less affordable. And these are downstream effects that then just continually perpetuate this cycle of homelessness. And why I got interested in looking at this, and let me tell you, if you asked me 20 years ago that I was going to be looking at policy and interested in policy change, I would tell you were insane. But when I actually started working with Chris around 7 years ago, I was at the youth unit at Boyle Street, and I'm not a typical academic. I sit and I get to meet my participants. Like I literally was at Boyle Street every single day for several hours a day, getting to know the youth. And I kept seeing the same youth coming in and hearing the stories of how, they've been homeless for 4, 5, 6 years. And so I was like, well, what's going on? And so what my research took me to was really looking at what we call falling through the cracks. They aren't cracks. The system is the crack. The system is creating the cracks that perpetuate homelessness, that makes it difficult to find housing. We have great organizations like Yes and Niganon and Homeward Trust, but even for them to provide housing, there's like assessment tools that have to be filled out, and they're like a 13-page or 14-page tool that tell a 18-year-old who's not been housed for however long that have to go through this, 14, 15-page sheet of paper to even see if they're eligible for housing. Well, Chris and Margo will tell you, they're going to tell you to F off and not go through it. So, there's an amazing young man that I talked to, and he said, if once someone becomes homeless, you need to get to them within 2 weeks. Because in 2 weeks, they're going to get entrenched in that culture of homelessness because they find community there. And again, Chris and Margo are going to be like, I'm an academic that works with people, but I'm not on the front lines. But this is what I've seen in my work. And to me, it's all connected to these policies that have been created that just continually perpetuate this cycle. And we have to find a way to just understand that we need to invest in people. I really hate when people talk about AISH or any sort of social support as spending. It's not spending, it's an investment in our people.
There's viewers like Daniel and April and Deborah. Their feedback on our live chat is just what they're just going, yes! People are just yelling, yes! That's the limit of the feedback to a certain degree. Two Beaver has established themselves. I don't know who Two Beaver is, but a regular contributor to our chat. I believe Two Beaver to be an Indigenous person based on their comments. And they say that, the greatest, now I'll put this in front of you, Chris, they say the greatest resource that Alberta has is our Indigenous population. I wish you could all treat us as such and love us like you do oil and coal. Let's talk about Indigenous people as our greatest resource, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish we were seen as powerful as some people see those commodities. But the reality is for us, looking back since colonialism and having to deal with assimilation and residential schools, and then I know there's been a lot of talk around the 60 scoop and the effects that had. But we're currently still dealing with a lot of these effects, and it's through children's services. And so, looking back on the work I did. I had these amazing, wonderful young people coming into my program seeking just someone to listen and someone to spend time with and someone to support their identity of who they are. Because a lot of times, walking down the street or going shopping or dealing with police or dealing with any kind of social worker in settings, people treat us differently. And so that identity becomes shameful. And so they want to hide it and they want to suppress it. And then the trauma that's related to that is, they want to escape it. And that turns to drugs and alcohol and risky behaviors. And then the effects that happen from those is just a continual cycle. And so a lot of our young people, that's part of what our programming intends to do with housing some of these young people, is to welcome them into a community, not just put them in a building somewhere. We're going to bring them into our 42-unit building, which is going to have cookums, going to have mushums, so that's grandmas and grandpas internally within our building, and families and cultural supports and elders. And we're going to have ceremony. We're going to teach them a little bit about themselves. So it's not just empowering others to view us as valuable. It's about us empowering ourselves to see each other as valuable. And I think that's what we believe in the long run is going to help these young people go from childhood to adulthood, because turning 18 does not make you an adult, especially if there has been no community, family support with you, guiding you through that process. And especially afterward, a lot of people, 18, 19, have parents they can rely on for financial support, or to learn how to, deal with buying a car properly or getting into school properly, right? And a lot of times for our people, we're seeking that from strangers who are paid, 9 to 5 to do that job. And really, the care is not there as it would be for a family member. And so that's some of the stuff we're trying to provide, is to build up ourselves and see ourselves as valuable as we are, and to use that moving forward for them.
I see when you talk about when you said the word cookum, and Margo just started nodding, and I think that we all, to a certain degree, even with limited experience or limited exposure, can acknowledge in Indigenous culture the importance of history and tradition, and the magnitude of the loss or the sacrifice or the attempt to quash that awareness of history and tradition as well. And we understand from Indigenous leaders the idea of what the time frame for recovery or reconciliation needs to look like. We hear of 7 generations, and it, I think, provides a clear understanding of what this commitment needs to look like. As boring as it can be, though I suspect the three of you can keep it from being boring, a lot of this will rely on things like funding and political policy. We hear from politicians at municipal levels. Don Iveson said he wanted to eradicate homelessness in 10 weeks in Edmonton. Haven't heard it a ton from this provincial government, not to say there's not a policy, it's just not front of mind. We hear the federal government talk about homelessness policies and billions of dollars committing to it, but if each of you had a chance to not bend the ear of government, but snag their pens and write policy, what would it look like? Margo, let me ask you first.
Just to back up there too, because I have a couple points, Ryan. From a business perspective, I'll be honest, I'm a raving socialist, and that comes across, but I do understand the return on investment. And if you look at what it costs to put, say, a young person through programs at Yes for a year, it's around $7,000. And we know, even from outdated data in 2017, that it costs over $100,000 to provide services to someone who's entrenched into adult homelessness. The ROI is there in terms of prevention. The other thing that's really important to know right now is that our children are dying, and they're dying more than ever. And that is something I've, specific data I have from Yes, from Boyle Street, from My Human. And it's not because they don't have a house. It's because they don't have a place to call home. It's because they've been separated from community and family, and they've been hurt by people they trust. They don't trust adults because adults have hurt them. And we do a huge disservice to our parents. The cycle becomes pretty quick because a lot of our young people become parents very early, and then a lot of support drops as well. So we greatly need housing for young parents, support and wraparound services. Places like Ambrose Place, we need much more sort of transitional residence as well as supportive housing. I would like to see personally a focus on parenting much earlier in our schools, understanding what adverse childhood experiences are and how we support child development, as well as intentional support for healing through some of these awful traumas that many of our population have gone through, but significantly in Indigenous populations. You know, if you're questioning that, I suggest you read Jesse Thistle's book, From the Ashes, to really understand what's happening in terms of intergenerational trauma and the effects. We need a strategy as well if we look at this from a business standpoint. Social services are not a business, but we need to be strategic and collaborative and work together. And we need to build positive relationships. And again, all of that is not about putting them in the house and walking away. It is about creating a safe, interconnected web of support and building joy and connection within our communities. And from my perspective, Indigenous communities have been doing this much longer, for 20 years at least. And that's where every time I read, I go back and see this is already being done. It's being done in Blue Clothes College. The Circles of Courage and Dr. Brokenleg's works are things that we refer to on a daily basis of what we need to move forward. And so that needs to be really put into a strategy of true prevention so that we can prevent further entrenchment into homelessness. And if we focused on that, 41% of our adult homeless were youth homeless. And so we're working on true prevention within the city. And that's from the 2017 Plan to End Homelessness research.
So, Cynthia, you're holding the pen on policy, or let me ask you this. You want to empower viewers, listeners to Real Talk right now to have some ammo. Let me rephrase how I don't want to say that anymore with regards to how hot button politics is right now. I'm not going to say ammo anymore. You want to give some people some powerful material to invoke, to talk about the next time a politician knocks on their door and asks them for their support. And these are people that care about homelessness. What's a specific policy or a specific step? I love what Margo talks about trauma therapy and parenting and understanding and education and recognizing some of the sources of some of these perpetual contributing factors. What's something we need to know about based on your research over more than 20 years?
You're only going to ask me for one. I just want to jump back. I'm going to answer that, but I want to jump back to the how we need to learn from our Indigenous peoples, because again, I am so blessed to be working with Chris and Niiganan Housing Ventures. And when I heard about the Belvedere complex and how it is going to house young people along with Kukums and Mushums and along with young families, that if something happens to the mother or father and there's needs to be support for the child, then the people in Belvedere are going to be there to help them. Obviously this is an Indigenous way of taking care of family, but we need to do this for everyone. I think we need to take this type of housing and just use it across the board. But if you were to ask me, one sweeping policy thing that I think would make massive changes is let's get a universal basic income, because while money doesn't solve everything, one of the biggest barriers to support children is poverty. And when you talk to people that are homeless or whose children have been apprehended, they were apprehended not because there was violence in the home or neglect, but because they couldn't afford to pay their rent. And some of the youth workers that I talked to, they said, sometimes young women are told if they are about to lose their house, well, just put your kids in care because at least they won't be homeless, and then you can go into a shelter, because you can't get into a shelter if you've got a child. And so then children are entering the child family services and the foster care system just because their mom couldn't afford to pay the rent. So if we were able to provide a barrier-free income support where you don't have to do the paperwork, where it just goes into your bank account, then the people that are helping the youth workers like Chris and Margo's staff that are helping these kids trying to figure out, well, what income? Should I apply for AISH or should I apply for that? They can actually provide them with that other wraparound support, that care that they need, the access to culture. And again, oh my God, if we can throw away $1.5 billion for a stupid pipeline that didn't go, maybe we can start a universal basic income in this province.
Well, I guarantee
happen.
I guarantee that a UBI will be a federal election issue. It has to be. I mean, if you think of what campaign platforms are going to look like for federal parties coming out of a pandemic, talking about economic recovery, talking about some of everything's different. Everything's changed with regards to debt load, personal issues, insolvencies, challenges facing entrepreneurs, challenges facing young people, challenges facing people that have health insecurities. I mean, I think I'm forecasting that it'll be more of a meaningful conversation on a universal basic income or other approaches than ever before. And Cynthia, I'd argue that you've probably given you get an A+, because we asked you to give us something to talk about on the doorsteps. That's one to go right to. And I'm not saying that people should
throw out treat housing as a human right, not as a commodity. We have to stop commodifying housing. Drives me crazy. We
got a lot of people, several people I've seen saying that on our live chat. Chris, let me ask you, you're holding the pen, you're drawing up the policy. What's one thing that you say, this is going straight from my wish list right into the law?
Well, one of the challenges that I've seen this past year was when the UCP government came in and tried to restrict the age range for youth receiving financial benefits from 24 and reduce it down to 22. Thankfully, some brave people stood up and challenged that, and so it's been held for the time being. But I know the government is still going to be trying to push to have that number pushed down, and that one right there scares me tremendously. I'd seen a report not too long ago about the youth who have died in the care of that age range in this past 9 months, and it's outweighing what we've seen in previous years. So to reduce that age is just going to make leave more young people vulnerable to dying and more vulnerable to long-term homelessness and become some of the individuals that we're later going to need to house at Ambrose Place. And that's why I think investing in young people, especially those facing homelessness or facing financial barriers, investing in them right now is going to save us millions and millions of dollars down the road. And help avoid some of the issues of having to open up all these large places in the city to house people in a pandemic. I mean, if our numbers were lower, we wouldn't have to worry so much. But the investment's going there now, whereas if we were looking at this a couple of years ago and saying we need more supportive housing right now in the city, which we still currently need, Ambrose Place has only 42 units of what is probably 500 to 800 units needed throughout the city. Many of these, the Edmonton Convention Center would not be housing all these people right now. So yeah, investment in young people at a younger age, stop trying to make more cuts. The more cuts we make, the longer this issue is going to be for our people.
Yeah, and I think Chris can probably also obviously speak to this more than I can, but we have to stop apprehending children from Indigenous homes and not putting them with Indigenous family members. So I'm going to be working on a research project with Chris following these youth to show the importance of reconnecting youth with their people and with their culture, because generally when they're apprehended, they're not put in families that are Indigenous. And again, Chris can speak to that more than I can, but that is a big problem as well. We're continually taking children, and it's because we have this Western colonial view of what parenting should look like, that we think is correct. And that is what is just continuing to perpetuate the problem as well.
Ryan, I can also speak a little bit to this chronological age issue. We see this a lot, if a kid's 18 or 22, they should be able to get a job and look after themselves. And I'm by no means an expert or a psychologist, but I do have some pretty great friends in the field and a lot of people that have been trying to explain it to me. And from what I understand about traumatic experience as a child, when you're in trauma, in crisis, your fight or fight freeze response is heavy and it doesn't go away. These kids are terrified and they're constantly vigilant. Their cortisol is raging through their bodies and they're just trying to stay safe, and they're in crisis. And in that stage, brain development stops. So young people, as they go through the 0 to 5 stage, are figuring out where they fit in the world and their impulse control, and parents are supposed to be co-regulating that and then transferring that regulation over to them. That may be completely gone for a young, someone that's grown up in a foster care system, in an institution, or seen some horrifying abuse or events happen. And then we're supposed to be building, getting out of the back of our brain, our limbic system, and building up this frontal cortex. And most teenagers don't have that yet. They're building the brain capacity to make good decisions. And that's why we have teenagers the way they are, in the sense of some of this is mush and you don't make good decisions necessarily. I know my teenagers didn't, and they were raised, in a fairly safe home with good parenting, I hope, and a lot of affluence. But if you're in crisis, this doesn't happen. And our brains don't, in a good situation, develop fully until age 24, which is why we've tried to push this age chronologically to that age to allow for that brain development. If you've been in crisis your whole life, that work hasn't happened yet. It can, but it's unfair to look at these young people with their chronological age, not even mentioning or factoring potential FASD or some of the other complex mental health issues that arise because of this. And so it's not even close to the same playing field. And it's criminal that we're not acknowledging that and dealing with it in an intentional way. The other thing that happens in trauma is that we make bad things that happen to us our fault. It's very shame creating. And so not only does the community disapprove of these young people who are really just displaying trauma responses, swearing, loud aggression, all of that is protection. And even the sort of the pieces that flow from that, whether it's addiction and criminal activity, those come from a sense of shame that they don't deserve love and success and all of those positive things that positive relationships build in a young person's life. They're working from a place that they deserve what they got. And that needs to stop. Because if we don't work on that and help them realize their self-esteem and their strength, the cycle continues.
I think society, I think that gets perpetuated with the whole pull yourself up from bootstraps mentality that if there's, if you're poor or if you're homeless, it's because of a moral failure. And it's not. It's because you didn't have a system of support around you that was able to help, the typical university student that isn't in the same situation.
But that's hardwired, I won't say into us, because not into every person, but I think of conversations that, we could talk about, for example, harm reduction, supervised consumption, that I know that there would be great overlap between homeless communities and people who use drugs and people who utilize harm reduction services. But I can tell you as a pundit and a public commentator that has had access to avenues or displays of public opinion, the number of times or the number of comments that I've witnessed, people talking about choices and poor choices and living with poor choices or sleeping in the bed you've made, it's a pervasive attitude.
Yeah.
It's
rough out there, and I think the director of program innovation at Yes has a really great analogy around, or at least an explanation of, you can't control what happens to you. That's not your choice. And your choice is how you deal with that afterwards. But when you're in the midst and young and don't have that ability to make good decisions yet, you're trying to figure all of that out. And I think there's no allowance or understanding for that.
No, and even when you're 18 to 24, which is typical university age, there's lots of risk-taking behavior. I see it all the time. I teach young people. But when you come from a from a background where you haven't experienced poverty or addiction or those kinds of things, those risk-taking behaviors are allowed with very few consequences. You're not going to get evicted from your apartment if you have a party, those kinds of things. But that stigma of having been homeless and now you're housed, or that you are living in poverty, or that you are Indigenous or BIPOC, that stigma then creates judgment. And so there's a much higher risk of eviction for the young people that Chris and Margo work with when they're housed and then have a party, right? And so
Absolutely.
We need to move on from that and understand that risk-taking behavior is normal, and we shouldn't automatically punish someone who used to be homeless that now engages in that behavior. It just continually perpetuates the cycle.
I've got a great.
It becomes just it's a place of being just for survival. A lot of our folk down in the inner city, especially young people, they don't ask for these addictions issues that come with it. It's the shame and trauma they have, and they fall into these folds down in the inner city where drug use is just there. There's larger drug dealers taking advantage of the situation of the people down there who are hurting, and they're feeding them all kinds of things to get them by. And a lot of these young people grew up in care, so they cross paths with each other in foster homes, in group homes, in the court systems. And so when they get pushed out at 18 and all of a sudden, here's your apartment, you can make it by, they don't make it. They end up at places like Yes, or they end up at places like Boyle Street or iHuman. And then, oh, I know you. And then there's this reality that they want to survive together now because everyone's let them down. There's no trust at all for anybody outside of that. And they just want to survive. And I know even for some of the young people I work with, like when we're building up their understanding of culture, identity, and ceremony, I've taken them out to communities to do sundances and sweats, and they run into family members there. And their whole mentality and outlook and everything shifts for them. I can see it right there in that meeting. And then, on the drive back, I know that's something I want to build on and work with them. But sometimes they're also shameful of the fact that, well, why do they want me now? I'm destroyed now. I'm worthless now. And so there's a lot of steps it takes for a young person to work them up to get them to a place where they feel confident in who they are. Unfortunately, the way the systems are out in the community, like when I was in the youth work doing work with these young people, they don't stop coming in. And my caseload, I was one person trying to work with, over 50, 60 young people at one time, and working on the housing and ceremony and mental health and the traumatic pieces, so many different moving pieces in there. But yet the funding isn't there to have 5 or 6 of me. That's what I always thought. If there was a team of me, man, we could do so much change throughout our other organizations, but for our young people. But that's the challenges we're still continuing to face. Even this program that Cynthia and I are working on right now with Indigenous Housing Ventures in our new building, there's no financial backing to this program. We just said, the need is there. We're going to build it, and we're going to figure out how the money is going to come together afterward. But at the end of the day, we just want to help our people. And we know we have the answers because we listen to our elders, we listen to our communities, and and we listen to our young people, and this is what they've asked for. And so we're just going to do it, hoping that, the forces out there will help support us financially to get it done well.
Okay. So we're going to take this, and we're now going to transition to another panel. We've got 6 expert voices this morning. I can't thank the 3 of you enough. Chris Beausoleil from Niganon Housing Ventures, Cynthia Puddu of Grant MacEwan University, and my good friend Margo Long from Youth Empowerment Support Services from Yes here in Edmonton. Thank you so much to the 3 of you. I encourage you, when this is all said and done, like an hour from now, when our YouTube broadcast is officially posted, to take some time out of your day and go back and read what the live chat was saying while you were talking. I think it will be a source of great encouragement. There's something special going on in our live chat. It's been that way since we launched the show. And I think that we might be on to something here. Thank you for the 3 of you and bringing your impassioned perspectives here to Real Talk.
Thanks for the
opportunity, Ryan.
Coming up in just a moment, we're going to talk to Cheryl Whiskeyjack, Susan McGee, and Jordan Reiniger. Sam behind the scenes does an amazing job of this turnaround here that'll happen rapidly. Brad is watching in. Brad says, your guests are bang on. If the brain gets stuck in fight or flight or freeze brain patterns based on trauma, the brain will not function properly. He says, I know this by personal experience, and it's not these people's fault. The live chat's been remarkable. First of all, I love this from Megan. Megan says, just a random thought. Would anybody be interested in like a Real Talk Discord that would allow these conversations to continue offline? I can't tell you what that does to us to read something like that. That's amazing, Megan. And you're giving us ideas all over the place. Michelle says, Ryan, you've got to do a show on universal basic income. Of course. Absolutely. Etrium says Alberta had a UBI back during the Great Depression. I never knew about it until I saw it at the Provincial Museum. Says museums, great places. Just the comments here. I mean, it's fantastic. I appreciate this. It's, Jude says it's so critical to establish the benefits of a universal basic income in this way. Heidi says, I'm so grateful for this show. All perspectives, important topics discussed. Heidi says, I remember when they had to remove about 50 people that were basically living in a large culvert when they were expanding the Anthony Henday Freeway. Justin says it's, been shown by studies in places like the Netherlands that actually can cost less in the long run to run programs like a UBI, like universal basic income, or actually giving people homes as opposed to current homeless initiatives. I'm just touching down on some of the comments with apologies to the so many. I mean, Julie Cusick is just a great community member. She says that just basically her heart's breaking hearing some of these stories. And I feel the same way. I mean, you can tell, Julie, that my screen skipped ahead on me and I lost your comment, but I want to try to do it justice. I'm trying to smoothly find my way back to what you had to say. This is a good problem to have. It's a problem because my screen refreshed because so many of you are commenting on this.
It's just not stopping today.
It's not stopping, is it?
Continuous stream. Yeah.
I mean, people are talking about how men are discriminated against as homeless fathers. Heidi points out you still can't take your child into a shelter for men if it's required. It's an actual issue. Judy says with UBI, we don't need employment benefits or welfare dollars. Here's Julie. My heart is breaking listening to the story about parents giving up their kids in order to access a shelter, all because of poverty. It's shameful. Julie says, please keep these reasons for a UBI coming. Well, listen, we've got 3 panelists ready to go right now to pick up the conversation. We don't have to wait for another show. We're going to keep going on this. But first, I want to thank a few of our partners that facilitate these conversations each and every day, including the team at Eden Landscaping. They know that right now, you can't see that, for example, my lawn, it's very evident that 2 dogs live at our house. The lawn is a patchwork of yellow and green.
Oh, mine too.
We love our dogs, so we love our dogs. All right?
Absolutely. The thing is, for me, like in the winter, she knows that she can't go in the garden in the summer. We're very good at policing that. In the winter, it's just covered over with snow, so
yes.
It's like fair game for her. So
yes,
I don't want to know what my garden's going to look like.
Oh, Sam, no, you don't want to know. You don't want to know. The team at Eden Landscaping, while they won't clean up a winter's worth of poop, and I'm going to say right now that is not what they do. They can bring in a bobcat. They can bring in a cat. They can bring in a backhoe. And just you level the whole thing and start fresh.
That's one way to clean up the poop.
That's one way to get it done. They're going to write us right now and say, would you mind just classing it up a little bit on our spots? They're a top-shelf landscape design agency. They've been doing it for more than 20 years. But they're using right now like Skype and Google Earth to take a look at properties and help you totally reimagine what your front or backyard could look like. You might say, my budget's not $150,000. They can do flower box. They can do planting boxes. They can do really neat things that'll really contribute to the improvement in the look of your property. And then they can do the big, huge stuff. People that are building a brand new, beautiful property, but the developer or the home builder gives you kind of bare minimum for landscape design. Give Eden Landscaping a call, landscapeedmonton.ca, and you can find them online at ryanjesperson.com. Westworld Computers right now, they're blowing out all of their overstocked trade-ins. So like Macs, watches, iPhones. You need to upgrade your MacBook Pro, you need to upgrade your iPhone. Now's the time. Save a few $100 and you can trust them. You're not meeting some guy in a parking lot that you heard about on Kijiji. Westworld's been in business for more than 40 years, family-owned. All their premium pre-owned Apple products go through rigorous inspection. They come loaded with original Apple software and include the minimum 30-day warranty at Westworld Computers. Let's pick up this conversation where we just left off. I'm looking forward to this, and if you follow conversations around justice, social justice, homelessness, the eradication of homelessness, you likely know these 3 individuals, and it's a pleasure to welcome to the program Susan McGee, the CEO of Homeward Trust. Susan, thanks for being here on Real Talk today.
Thanks for having me.
Cheryl Whiskeyjack with the Bent Arrow Traditional Healing Society. Cheryl, welcome to you.
Thanks for having me.
And Jordan, I want to make sure I pronounce your last name correctly here with Boyle Street Community Services. Is it Jordan? Do I say Reiniger?
Yeah, that works.
No,
I
what?
accept
How do you,
most pronunciation? Reiniger works. Yeah.
How do you say it?
Reiniger is good.
Reiniger. Okay. Well, warm welcome to you, Jordan, and a big fan of the incredibly important work that you and your team are doing at the Boyle Street. Cheryl, first of all, I want to thank the three of you for your patience. Our previous interview went a little bit into overtime, but we had engaged panelists that had a lot to say, and I'm thrilled to be able to simply keep that going here. It's like a relay race where they pass the baton. And Cheryl, it makes perfect sense, I think, to hand that baton to you. Cynthia and Margo and Chris were all talking about the importance of reconciliation, of understanding trauma and providing supports. That's what you and your team do. What did you make of what they were saying?
Well, I had a hard time tearing myself away to go to the waiting room, but I did catch some of the conversation this morning, and I absolutely agree on all the points that they touched upon before I left. What I want to say about our work with these folks is that culture is about reconciliation, and culture is way more than feathers, drums, and beads. Culture is a way of relating. Culture is language. Culture is medicine. Culture is ceremony. And being able to provide what we do in partnership with people in the city who are serving Indigenous people, that's what we bring to the table and what we're able to share with the participants, but also share with our colleagues who are also serving this community. And we're all about building capacity in our partners because we're all serving them. And so if we can serve them in a meaningful way, then that's the goal.
One of the, I think, the powerful statements that I saw as I was reviewing some of Cynthia Puddu's work is describing homelessness as a pandemic within the pandemic. What have you seen, Jordan, if I can call it the front line? What have you noted at Boyle Street Community Services with regards to how people are accessing services and maybe even some of the strains, some of the challenges, some of the deficiencies in service provision when it comes to homelessness?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I think Cynthia's right on in terms of, homelessness itself is actually a health crisis. What we know from studies is, people who are experiencing chronic homelessness are 3 to 4 times more likely to die than the general population, which is a shocking figure. And, overrepresentation of people who are experiencing mental health issues. Over 70% of people in one study, very serious mental health issues that are on the street. And so you have those really serious mental health issues, the other sort of public health crises that are facing people. And then you layer onto that the challenges of COVID and, with all of the different physical distancing challenges and things like that, a lot of the services that people relied on to survive went away or were significantly curtailed. Part of the reason why we needed to have responses like early on the Expo Center and, later on Tipinawa at the Convention Center. But I think one of the things that has really been highlighted for me in this and has reinforced for me as we've kind of done the work at Tipinawa, the emergency shelter system, this sort of model of mass congregation of people, hundreds of people in a room overnight, is not an effective model for solving homelessness. And so we have explored other models throughout the pandemic funded by Homeward Trust and the City of Edmonton around different ways of transitioning people from the street into housing more directly and more effectively. And so while the pandemic has, we look at things like the bridge housing model or really short-term focused transitional supports for people that provide privacy, autonomy, dignity, and provide that stability to allow people to think about what they hope for in their life rather than just the sort of daily struggle to survive. Those are the things I hope we take from the pandemic and move forward with.
Susan, you do so much work on the advocacy front, and you do so much work. I know that a lot of what you do is influencing policy and all the types of things that, just to be real for a second, a lot of civilians or laypersons, our eyes just glaze over when we talk about a lot of that. And I think people want to know how they can control the narrative, or how they can contribute, or how they can pressure their elected representatives, or how they can contribute to social agencies, how they can be change makers in their own community and make a real impact. What do you tell those engaged audience members that are hearing this live now or later on the podcast?
Well, absolutely use your voice. I mean, you've mentioned a number of the ways that we can make sure that the awareness that's been created in this pandemic and folks have been exposed to and become much more aware of how we have been treating people in a crisis, in how we respond to someone who is homeless, and what we're able to offer them has been so limited, and for a very long period of time, not just recently. So the pandemic has really created a lot of awareness of that. It's so important that shows like this continue to actually lift it up even further. The earlier panelists and the discussion about trauma and brain development, and when Jordan's talking about how we respond in large settings and creating an environment where people can actually sleep through a night. There's incredibly well-grounded science around sleep hygiene and being able to get sleep so that you can actually work towards your recovery and work towards your solution. So all of that information has been, I think, really kind of laid bare, the challenges that our system has had, and that we've actually designed a system historically that's made it really high barrier to get support. So well, it's hard to look for a silver lining this many months in, and when we're all really exhausted. One of the things that we do know is that we have exposed those cracks in the system. And I think the public, it's so important that we don't lose sight of that, and we advocate in a really, and this is a very informed way. This isn't, it shouldn't take more than the social justice angle sometimes. I think that we kind of feel like we're having to build a case to do the right thing. But the fact is the science is there, and, the pandemic has helped us really articulate that.
I've got an interesting comment here from James on our Real Talk live chat. James says, I would imagine that mental health issues here are made worse by the fact that many of these people simply don't have a home. So this just goes to show again why we need affordable housing. Cheryl, you're nodding. There are so many factors at play here, right? I suppose that one could become overwhelmed to suggest, well, we need to figure out affordable housing. We need to talk about universal basic income. We need to talk about trauma supports. We need to talk about harm reduction. We need to be able to address substance use in meaningful fashion. How do you keep from being overwhelmed here? Like when you wake up every morning, how do you ground yourself? Where's your focus?
So I'm really fortunate, Ryan, that I'm able to live a life of ceremony. And those are our teachings. So our teaching is that from the day you're born, your ceremony has started. And when you think about your life, Ryan, being able to have a meal before you start your day is a part of your ceremony. Having a good place to sleep, like Susan talked about, the night before, is a part of your ceremony. It helps you to do the good things that you do during the day. So, we look at all of these factors in the work that we do over there as being critical to providing the support services that we do. And we take the folks that we're serving where they're at. We have met so many people there who became homeless because of the pandemic and never saw themselves in this kind of place, weren't people who typically use substances to cope with their present circumstances, but were finding themselves using substances to cope with their present circumstances. And us being there is about providing an alternative so that they can still look towards achieving that balance despite their circumstances, and working with them to make those things, those circumstances different for them. Language, I spoke about that earlier. We met a man there who kept to himself, wouldn't speak with the helpers in the room, the people who could get him housed, who could provide all kinds of support services. The reason why he wasn't engaging was because his first language was Cree. And our team had language speakers on it. And as soon as they spoke to him in his language, a whole world opened up about all the ways that we could serve him. We found out that he was actually listed as missing with the RCMP because his family and his community hadn't heard from him and were extremely worried about him. He thought he let them down. He felt ashamed about the circumstances he found himself in and didn't know how to get himself out of that. And we were able to reconnect. And so this is like one of those really powerful stories that we're hearing from the shelter about how being there is medicine. It is good that we're there, that we're able to speak to them in a language that they can understand and connect the dots that are all there in the shelter.
Jordan, do you see stories like this every day or no?
Every day. There are a lot of challenges in terms of the system and not being resourced the way it ought to be, and not having the kind of supports that I think people need. But the incredible work, particularly of people on the front line, who are putting themselves at risk, particularly in the pandemic, working with the population and doing really incredible work under very difficult circumstances. And we see those challenges and those changes in people's lives every single day. Even just looking at the sort of bridge housing model, nearly 300 people have moved from being in a place of homelessness into permanent housing. That's just one program, one story in a whole suite of different services that are happening. So really positive change is happening, and people are being connected. The story of the frontline teams that are really doing incredible work, that we owe a lot of gratitude in our community for putting themselves at risk and doing that in a pandemic. We're seeing lots of really positive change in the community for sure.
Susan, I have it doesn't matter if we're talking about cryptocurrency or homelessness or international investment or pipeline approval or event management or public health policy. It doesn't matter. And I could keep going. And providing examples of how every conversation we have, without exception, has an asterisk. It has a caveat that we need to talk about what it looks like after the pandemic. Everything, every aspect of our lives is impacted by this pandemic. How does the conversation around homelessness? I mean, I talked to a buddy the other day, and I don't want this to go off in an unproductive angle, or I don't want to distract our conversation, but this is a guy is a savvy and smart entrepreneur. I would trust him to invest my money on my behalf. And the direction that he has blown everything up, and he's poured an entirely new foundation on how he perceives markets, investment, everything. How has this conversation changed, or how does it need to change, or how will it change as a result of how we've reevaluated our priorities over the past year, how we understand the need for social supports, how some of us have learned real lessons in humility, how we've started to try to walk miles in other people's shoes? How does the conversation change moving forward?
That's a fantastic question, and so much in it. I think I can pick apart a few things that are immediately coming to mind. You mentioned just in terms of the innovation of just how your contractor is working. I mean, the front line that Jordan is referring to and housing workers have been finding housing for folks in really creative ways, and actually looking at apartments through Zoom meetings and calls. And we just had all these little incremental things that have come together to make it possible for us to continue to house at a pace of about 165 folks a month through the Housing First teams alone. And so, there's been innovations that have happened, and not to say that we always will want to work that way, but in creating those innovations, what we went from is into a space where we just had to. And that, amongst many other decisions, we do things now in days and perhaps weeks that we might have had processes of months and sometimes longer to discuss and work on, and when we are just not able to do that in the pandemic. And actually what we've learned is that we shouldn't do that ever. We actually can, with confidence and with the level of coordination that we have in our community, move fast and pivot when necessary. During the pandemic, a lot of things that have happened is like the resourcing that's been so important, and having announcements that have put a lot of money into our responses. But as a community, we've had to say, so what's the best possible way to respond so that during the pandemic, we can play forward and make sure that we continue to have housing as an outcome, and we don't shift everything to this kind of reactive space. So we've done that. And I think that those are the kind of things that are now becoming more how we work and how we should work in the future, and building the confidence around that. I think there's also a really important role that mainstream services play. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about our health response, mental health and addictions, and justice. And, that's been a long conversation for a very long period of time, that we need to work with those systems. In this environment, it has been an imperative, and it's changed how we work, and it's changed the structure of how we are problem solving. And that needs to go forward. That, we've really exposed that, housing is a health issue. And so we need to continue those conversations and work in that way. That's not going to go away. And if it does, it's on us, because we know better now.
Dylan on our live chat says, I'm so thankful this conversation's happening. He says, we tend to get distracted with the ever-changing news cycle. He says, I believe Edmonton can be a leader in solving this. I think it's worth investing in people. Neha says, culture is the strongest point of community. Reconciliation could go a long way in helping solve this problem. We should adopt new thoughts, new skills, new technology to solve problems when we face weakness. Jacqueline asks an interesting question. Margo Long from Yes was on, 20 minutes ago or so, and she was talking about teaching parenting skills in school and teaching kids, equipping kids to recognize and deal with trauma and some of the basic things. I mean, geez, anytime I talk to financial managers, they talk about how, we don't teach kids about credit cards. We don't teach kids about important things about financial management in school. Maybe our high school or even our junior high school curriculum needs an overhaul, and maybe this subject matter needs to play into that greatly. Jacqueline says, what supports would these three prioritize in schools? She says, wraparound services have been cut. What role do they think they play? Cheryl, let me ask you first. When it comes to curriculum, when it comes to what we teach our young people, obviously there is the tradition side. You've talked about Indigenous culture and ceremony, and obviously that's incredibly important. Language, spirituality. What about curriculum?
Well, I'll challenge that it isn't something separate than curriculum, that it is curriculum, that we have had curriculum for millennia. We have rites of passage teachings for everything, from birth to old age. And so when Margo talked about those things that we could be teaching those rites of passage teachings in curriculum. And when we have the opportunity to engage with students in Edmonton Public Schools, because that's the system that we're attached to, we do use those rites of passage teachings and incorporate them in the programs that we have, like our mentoring programs. So I think it's one and the same. There is a teaching around when a young girl turns into a woman, and the responsibility that comes with that. And there's a ceremony that's incorporated in that. And so that impacts how she conducts herself, how she carries herself from that day forward when she gets those teachings at the right time. And I agree with Margo, our kids aren't getting those teachings. We've lost those ways. You can look at it from a Western perspective, but in our teachings, we have those teachings already.
We heard from our previous panelists that, and I didn't have them cite the source. I'll admit I'm taking their word for it, but I have no reason to believe they'd be presenting incorrect or inaccurate statistics, but that at least 40% of the adult homeless population were homeless as young people. I would imagine, Jordan, you see that. What role do you think schooling plays into this? I mean, am I guilty of overestimating the role that school plays in this, or what do you think?
No, I think, one of the things we see with the vast majority of the people that we walk alongside is that the impact of those adverse childhood experiences. So when, they're having those experiences of trauma as children, that has a profound impact over time in terms of their likelihood to become homeless or experience trauma and have that later on in life. And so, I think schools in particular, really good, well-resourced schools that can support kids, but more importantly, support families to be healthy and stay together. That I think that's an important place where we, as a community, come together. And that if we had really strong schools that did a lot of work to support families, that would go a long way, actually, in terms of addressing the long-term challenges of homelessness.
Susan, what do you think?
Yeah, the stat in my mind is probably even a bit higher than that. I mean, I think poverty is a common denominator of an experience of homelessness, and so is a previous experience of homelessness. From chronic homeless individuals, folks that experience homelessness for a long duration and frequently, an experience of homelessness as youth is almost universal. So I think that that's so critical when we think about those long-term I know that Margo also cited just the cost of actually intervening and really supporting a youth compared to what that future may look like for them and the cost of the system if they don't get the support at the right time. So I think it's really important to be thinking about that in the context of the systems that where youth interact the most, which is at schools, and making sure that not just from a teaching about it, but the awareness and within our by name list about, even adults, and there's some youth certainly within it, almost half the people on it are provisionally housed, which means couch surfing, sleeping in circumstances that are very, very tenuous. And we know that is a very common experience for youth experiencing homelessness, and they will be under the radar. Folks won't know without an active and proactive conversation that they are in crisis and that they need support. And because they may move, from circumstance to circumstance. And so just a general, embedding the societal responsibility of identifying that and responding early on and through our systems is very, very important.
Okay, so I like to wrap an interview with a call to action. And what's especially great about this is that, for all intents and purposes, the show is signing off air for the day after we wrap this panel. So you're going to give us something to think about. People are going to walk with this. They're going to chew on this and digest it for the rest of the day. No pressure to our panelists. But I want to task each of you to give us something to walk with, to think about, to challenge our neighbors on, to talk to our friends about. Jordan, we'll start with you. What's your call to action?
I think that as we've talked about, the pandemic has showed us that we can respond quickly and we can rethink things and do things differently. I think the call to action for your listeners is to consider really educating yourself about homelessness. We have some elections coming up in the next couple of years. I think all 3 orders of government are going to be going to the polls the next couple of years. And so educate and consider giving your vote to a population that is often underrepresented and doesn't have a voice, and make that the issue that you care about in the next elections, whether it's federal, provincial, or municipal.
Susan, your call to action?
Yeah, I mean, I can't stress enough how much that education piece matters to me as well. And I think along those lines, to really understand the possibility. I think that when we start to fail to believe in the possibility and the potential of individuals and that we can solve this issue, we tap out way too soon. And I can't stress enough that we can end homelessness because we know we have for so many thousand individuals that would otherwise still be experiencing that. So I think, that and whatever, sometimes we have to reach and make things relevant to ourselves based on analogies. It's like we design a system when we are, and a friend, my cousin shared this with me, to kind of connect the dots, that when you design a system for industry and you have a zero death approach to how you're going to have a safety plan, you don't design it that 3 deaths is okay. You don't design our response that it's okay that X many people actually live on the street. And I think that's the way we kind of need to think and embrace and come up with solutions and be all in on that, and to find those ways of kind of breaking out maybe some biases and barriers to really being able to commit to that possibility, because it's a very real one.
Cheryl, last word to you, my friend.
Oh my gosh, I have a few words. Just a really great conversation this morning. And, the work we've been doing at the Beausoleil has been in partnerships. So we worked in partnership with the Edmonton Convention Center, the City of Edmonton, Beausoleil, Homeward Trust. Like, there's just been a lot of players at the table working together and learning together. We talked about curriculum in schools. So the partnership, the potential for the ripple of partnership to go beyond this work and beyond this pandemic, I think is something we really need to explore and commit to beyond the pandemic. The other thing I want to say, I've been talking a lot about ceremony this morning, and I'm not trying to indoctrinate all of our listeners. What I am trying to say is that everyone, no matter who you are, has an experience with ceremony. And that when you think about it in your own context, in your own life, that is how ceremony goes, no matter what you're doing and no matter who you are. And so that is the way we try to come at the work. And we're learning and growing with our partners in this work. The call to action is to keep it going. The City of Edmonton has an Indigenous framework. They're a partner at this table. So learning what we're learning in this experience, how do they incorporate that in all of the areas that they touch? So that would be my call to action.
That's Cheryl Whiskeyjack of the Bent Arrow Traditional Healing Society, Susan McGee, the CEO of Homeward Trust, and Jordan Reiniger of Boyle Street Community Services. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise and your passion with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
You bet. And we'll keep this conversation going. I love that idea again from listener Megan, viewer Megan, I should say, watching us live on YouTube, who wonders how these conversations can continue. At the very least, we push this right back onto our working list. We've got a long list of issues that are important to you, and we know that because you tell us. You tell us by way of our question of the week. You tell us on Twitter. You tell us using our hashtag. You tell us by reaching out. By sending an email to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Some of our best story ideas have come from you at home going, you know what I've not heard discussed? You know what talk shows are not tackling? You know what's not leading the news right now is this. And you lay it out for us. And all of a sudden we've got thousands of people talking about it, which we greatly appreciate. Thousands of people are also talking about Dairy Queen right now. They're talking about it because dilly bars are on 2 for $1 at Dairy Queen's in Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Sam, did you happen to see, by the way, great feedback to your endorsement the other day of the dipped cone? Somebody wrote into the shows to say that was strangely compelling. They said it was oddly compelling.
I do what I can.
You did a great job. Well, Ryan...
Or should I say, I do what I can to get those delicious dipped
you gotta kind of drop in. You gotta find a way to. So Ryan Young tweeted at us last night, and you go, Ryan Young, isn't that the guy that he's at Nate's business school and he's like a board member at Edmonton Community Development? Yeah, like the guy's a major player. The guy's a big deal. So he sends me a photo yesterday of all the kids with dilly bars. It was amazing. I tweeted it out. I actually was pretty proud of my tweet. I said it was hot tweets and cool treats.
I loved that.
Ryan,
I love that because it's a throwback.
It's a throwback.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I know it's not the current Dairy Queen marketing, but I think they'd be okay with it.
It was good marketing, though.
Ryan wonders, what do you do when the kids are outside playing a socially distant game of laser tag? You listen to Jespo, the podcast, and you head over to Dairy Queen in Westmount to buy 4 boxes of dilly bars. 4 boxes! He says 2 for $1 till the end of the month, but the thing is, there's a few kids helping him out.
Whoa. Where can you go play outdoor, socially distanced laser tag? I went in on that.
I suspect that they own their own equipment.
Okay, probably.
If you want to see the photo, you can follow me on Twitter and you'll see it there. Also, a big shout out, when we're paying attention to Twitter, we're paying attention to our hashtag RealTalkRJ. That's the one that trends whenever Real Talkers come alive on an issue. It's powered by Park Power, the team that has been providing internet, natural gas, and of course electricity to Albertans since 2013. They make a commitment to profit share. 10% of their profits go to nonprofits, charities in their own backyard, which is really an incredible commitment. You've got to give your business to somebody. Why not give it to Park Power, especially with their promo code 2021-RealTalk. If you use that at parkpower.ca right now, they're going to give you $70 off your first bill, commercial or residential, at parkpower.ca. And finally, the team at Local Waste doing an amazing job, I know, expanding their business because I see evidence of it. More and more of these green bins are popping up outside businesses. I'm taking it as an indicator that it's Real Talkers. It's Real Talkers that are taking their business to Local Waste, an independently and family-owned business for more than 25 years. They love to talk trash. They want your business, whether you're a big shopping mall or a supermarket, or maybe you're a small family business, but you've still got to find a way to get your waste managed. You can give Chris or Lauren Labossiere a call at 780-242-9746 or check out localwaste.ca. Another nice bit of timing there, Sam. That was really well done.
I was watching the counter when we went on a bit of a Dairy Queen tangent and thought, is this track going to be long enough? And you hit that perfectly.
Nailed it. They call it hitting the post in broadcasting, and I felt like I could see it coming. Our inboxes are smoking right now. We might need to, I don't know, I don't talk tech, I don't know how it works, but I don't know if we need to upgrade our servers or what we need to do, expand our storage. But we're getting a ton of feedback from people like Dan. Dan says, I've been listening to this show even before I dive into Howard Stern every day. He says, now that's a compliment. It is. He says, I've been a reclamation and remediation specialist in Alberta for 13 years. He says, I sat on my ass for 5 months this spring and summer because the Kenney government absolutely bungled the rollout of the federal government's grant program to clean out inactive wells. They denied so many applications at the start of the program, and few companies actually got to work. They were also so busy cutting jobs at the Alberta Energy Regulator, backing a fantasy pipeline project, and relaxing environmental monitoring obligations into the oil sands to get people in my industry back to work. Dan works in the industry. Don't try to paint him as an enemy of it. He says, my company suffered greatly due to the relaxing of environmental regulations in May. They blamed it on COVID, but environmental monitoring and sampling is one of the lowest risk COVID-related jobs on earth. It was a bullshit excuse to save the oil companies a few shekels. He says the federal government wage subsidy, the inactive well grant program are the only two reasons we didn't go bankrupt this year, says Dan. Now I have to ask, what has the Kenney government done right to create jobs or help Albertans in this slow economy? I can't think of one single thing. That from Dan, who says he loves the show. People like Dan, people like you are always going to have a voice here, and we encourage you to take the time to send us an email if something that we said today resonated with you, if something really stuck with you. And I want to remind you as well that coming up on Friday, we're going to be taking a look. Can you call up the results? I know it's on the fly here, but our question of the week from last week with Y Station, we've built our Friday roundtable. It's actually going to be completely different than anything else we've done because it's a rotating list of panelists. I'm bringing on, I'm not going to say he's a co-host, but Conservative MP Mike Lake's going to ride shotgun with me, and we're going to talk about improving the quality of politics. Last week, about 1,800 of you responded to our Y Station Get Real question of the week. How do we stop the decline in the overall quality of politics? We're talking about town and city councils, provincial and federal governments. We're talking about foreign governments like the United States. And it's interesting to see those numbers. Sam, let's take a look again. Look at the big ones. Look at the big bits of feedback. 71% of respondents thought that a way to ensure quality in politics was to demand more accountability from elected officials when they screw up or act in bad faith. 71%. Look at that, leading the charge. We're going to really dig into some of those numbers in meaningful fashion with our Friday Roundtable panelists. There's some stars joining us. I'm going to reveal one of them. One of them, you're going to go, what's this guy doing talking politics? What does this guy have to do with improving the quality of politics? CFL All-Star Darius Bowman is going to be one of our panelists on Friday.
Woo!
Yeah, I know, right? And you might be a little surprised to hear what Darius has to say about politics. I am really, really, really looking forward to that conversation. That's coming up Friday from 9 to 10. Now, in the meantime, we have our current question of the week, and we want you to chime in on this. This is how we know what Real Talkers care about, how you feel. It's how you can determine, hey, do I stand in solidarity with the other thousands of people that either watch live or listen to the podcast or watch YouTube later? Or am I an outlier? Am I alone on an island? You go to ryanjesperson.com and you click on Question of the Week. It's right at the top of the page. It takes 2 minutes. And it's your way to have your say in the content of our show. And this week, as we saw Joseph R. Biden Jr. sworn in as the 46th POTUS, President of the United States, replacing Donald Trump, regardless of how you feel about Trump, he had a huge impact on the U.S., on Canada-U.S. relations, and, of course, the office of the presidency. So in this week's question, we want to know your thoughts about the two presidents, 45 and 46, their legacies, their priorities, and the future of Canada-U.S. relations. So we're asking you statements like, how do you feel about the statement, Joe Biden can bring America together? How do you feel about the statement that President Trump was good for Canada? How do you feel about the statement that Donald Trump ruined red baseball caps forever? We want to know how you feel as part of our Get Real question of the week, and I encourage you to complete that today if you haven't already. Hundreds and hundreds of you have already, but that's something we're going to be talking about coming up on Monday morning. In the meantime, we hope that you have a wonderful Thursday. We know we kept you a little long today, but we're not going to apologize. Everybody's got free will. In fact, one of these days, maybe we'll roll through till noon if Megan and everybody else has their say. Thanks for this, friends, and we'll talk to you tomorrow, 8:30 Mountain Time, right here on Real Talk.
They're gonna